So let me ask you, what do Rachel from Genesis, Ruth from the book of Ruth, and King David from 1 Samuel and then on have in common? Well, they all come from Bethlehem. As we're looking at this classic hymn, Christmas carol, O Little Town of Bethlehem, all three of these biblical characters have a connection from Bethlehem. Maybe they don't come from Bethlehem, but they have a connection with Bethlehem. Rachel is the first chosen wife of Jacob, and she would end up dying in Bethlehem. It said that she's still buried in Bethlehem. And the thing about Rachel is, though, even though she was chosen first, she was barren for a very long time. And so this woman that Jacob loved, who he wanted the future to go through Rachel, that just wasn't in the cards for a long time. And so Rachel, even though she was picked first, became the underdog. And then we have Ruth, who is married, but her husband dies, and she ends up having to go with her mother-in-law, Naomi, back to the outskirts of Bethlehem in order to survive. And to survive, Ruth ends up gleaning the fields of her relative Boaz, just picking whatever scraps she can find. And Bethlehem in Hebrew means the house of bread. So she's gaining wheat from Boaz's field, and very much an underdog in this story. And then, of course, King David, who would grow to be what Israelites would say is the man after God's own heart, wasn't even invited to the lineup when Samuel goes to Jesse's house in 1 Samuel to anoint the next king after Saul has lost favor. They have all, like however many sons Jesse has, David literally is not invited to the lineup because he's the youngest, he's the scrawniest. He doesn't fit what a king should be. So he's the underdog. And what we see wrapped up in Bethlehem is this tale of underdogs. Even the hymn, O Little Town of Bethlehem, as you think about the lyrics of how it sleeps silently and it's still and there's not a lot going on. Bethlehem is about 5 miles away from a more major city of the time, Sepphoris. And people from Bethlehem would go work in Sepphoris. They would go work for other people in Sepphoris. It's about 7 miles away from Jerusalem, the big capital city with a temple, and people would go commute to there. And then eventually with Mary and Joseph having to commute from Nazareth, it's a full about 80 miles away from that other backwater city. But Bethlehem's kind of an outpost. It's an underdog in its own right. It's still, it's dreary, it's sleepy. No one really would have expected that Bethlehem would be the home of the future king. But here we are seeing, O Little Town of Bethlehem, this bright light that is shining out of it. And even the carol itself, it was written by a Presbyterian minister named Philip Brooks. He was actually working with children and trying to come up with a way of teaching them the nativity story in 1865. So Reverend Brooks put the lyrics down on paper, and then Louis Render was a wealthy real estate agent who also happened to play organ at the church. And together they collaborated on this hymn, and both of them just assumed, well, this is good enough for kids, and it won't even make it past this one Christmas. But yet people heard it, and it gave them this amazing sense of peace that even out of a town like Bethlehem, the town of underdogs, the town that was overlooked by the bigger cities around them, that is where God chose to come into this world in the person of Jesus Christ, who we call our Messiah and our Savior. So in your small group time today, I would love for you to consider when are times in which you felt like you've been down and out, maybe without a purpose or a plan, or when have you felt like you've been the weak one in the situation? And maybe how has God used that moment to put you in the right situation to actually succeed? Or maybe you're in a weakened state and you're able to then help empower somebody else, and by doing that you become strong. In the Methodist Church, we have this belief in grace. And not just grace that comes from a decision we make to follow Christ, but a grace called prevenient grace. And it's grace that comes before. It's grace that's available to everybody. It's the way God is working, even in the smallest of us. So take some time as you get your discussion questions and ponder how it is that even in a maybe still, dreary town, a dreary still state that you might be in this season, how God can use you to bring light into the world.